Hi, and welcome to the Cloud Computing and Agency Missions panel. My name is Sarah Sybert. I'm a staff writer and researcher with GovernmentCIO Media and Research, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Today's esteemed speakers will dive into how their organizations are using cloud computing to build out comprehensive data strategies that guide federal IT transformation and better deliver on their agency's core missions. This is a very timely conversation as data repositories only grow, and organizations are looking to leverage this myriad of information to make actionable decisions and deliver value. On today's panel, we're joined by Joe Foster, Cloud Computing Program Manager at NASA, and Daniel LaMarco, Senior Solutions Architect at Infor. Unfortunately, Mike Horton, Chief Data Officer at DHS, had an urgent matter come up this morning and will no longer be participating in this discussion. But I'd like to welcome and thank Joe and Dan for joining us today. Today, you'll also see Wade Forbes sketchnoting our conversation, and your view will be moving back and forth between his visualization and our chat, and then shared after this event. So let's kick off the discussion by addressing the strategy behind transitioning to cloud. Joe, we'll start with you, and Daniel, feel free to jump in as you see fit. So how can agencies use cloud to accelerate innovation and efficiency instead of contributing to infrastructure and budgetary bloat? And then what are some of the pitfalls to look out for on the cloud journey? Over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think as Danielle just mentioned, getting the right platform and foundation in place has really been key for us. If you don't have that right enterprise platform approach, you end up with a lot of sprawl, as you could imagine, with varying degrees of technical debt and varying degrees of probably waste. And so I think getting that platform in place, which is what I've been trying to do over the last 3 years, has really accelerated NASA's adoption. And then I think once you get that right, core infrastructure and platform in place, I think you can sort of move up the stack, if you will, and address higher level needs, right? For us, it was moving data first, getting the right infrastructure in place to move the data, especially if you're talking about large volumes of data, and then eventually focusing in on the analytics of the data itself.
Yeah, and Joe, just to even hit on what you were just saying there. When at Infor, when we are working with our customers, starting off with that reference architecture, which is really just a byproduct of what the business capabilities are looking for, but really laying out what that reference architecture is, not only from applications and data stores, but your data warehouses or data lakes that you may have. But it's really getting a handle on your reference architecture, what applications are consuming what data, what you would actually need to serve up real-time, near real-time, offline, and being able to actually paint that picture so that when you actually are going to move to the cloud, you have a value associated with the data, and you've got some data governance in place there as well, and discoverable. So to your point, it really does start with taking a look at the data, the applications that consume it, and the reference architecture to actually move.
Right, so as you're doing that, what are some of the biggest challenges associated with varying cloud security requirements across federal agencies? How can agencies work with cloud vendors to ensure everyone's on the same page when not everyone uses FedRAMP, or when different programs within a federal agency may subscribe to different cloud policies? Joe, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So it's interesting since you brought up FedRAMP. NASA has similar challenges to DoD, as Danielle was mentioning, with us, compute at the edge and network at the edge. Most people don't think of, satellite ground stations as part of your IT infrastructure, but we have that, right? NASA has, 20, 25 ground stations all over the world that's beaming back data from space. And that's part of our IT infrastructure, right? Like getting the data back to Earth and then getting it the backhaul, as Danielle mentioned, back to the United States, where we're doing the processing and ultimately making the science data available to the public. So that's been really challenging for us, especially as we're talking about the data volumes growing in the future. We're coming up on the dawn of a new era, as I believe it to be, with NASA launching several petabyte scale science missions here in the near future. And we only see those growing as part of the president's agenda to address climate change. So that's been really challenging for us, trying to modernize both the IT infrastructure as well as dealing with that data transport issues as well. And so since you brought up FedRAMP, right, like FedRAMP tends to look particularly at the continental United States and the cloud service providers. So trying to leverage some of those OCONUS or overseas locations at the edge also makes it challenging for us.
Yeah, and we from a vendor perspective, and this there really is just we could spend a whole hour just on this topic alone, because when you sit there and you think about CMMC, and so for those companies that are out there that are supplying to the DoD and compliance with CMMC, so that's relatively new, and then NIST and FISMA and FedRAMP, and so for the different organizations, what does it mean, and then what does it mean for those organizations that are also cross-border too? So, possibly I'm headquartered in Canada, but I've actually got a manufacturing plant in North America that supplies, to the DoD or to NASA for that matter. So, all of those compliance and regulatory issues, really has to come into play. And, quite frankly, the vendors have to understand, and at Infor, we put a heavy emphasis on this, really need to understand what does all that mean, and then how we actually got our customers to make sure that they are in regulatory compliance, that all of our systems are in regulatory compliance, and we are audited often. But so it is a relatively complex topic, and knowledge is power in this regard, and it's really understanding for all of the different scenarios that may play out in the regulatory requirements that you're going to be subjected to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as you're working through some of these hurdles and challenges, how are you all using AI and machine learning to assist with filtering and refining large amounts of data in a cloud environment? Dan, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, so one of the things with AI and ML is the relevancy of the problem that you're trying to solve. So Joe over there at NASA, I can't even imagine. It's NASA. He works for NASA for a reason, right? They're the smartest people in the room, but it's the relevancy of the problem that you're trying to solve. So the things that we get involved in Infor are really along the lines of, like, we worked with Flying J and pricing of their gasoline. So that's a smaller data set, but it's also a data set that is not historical in context. So it's all about, what should I set the price of gas today, as opposed to what's been the historical price of gas over the last 20 years or something like that. You also see that with some of the COVID related solutions that have been brought forth too. So when you're applying AI and ML, there's all kinds of things you need to be thinking about in terms of memory constraints. How big is the data set? How much history of the data set do you need? And so when you look at even COVID and how that has changed over the course of the last 18 months, the data for over the last week or 2 weeks is actually more important than it was over the course of the last 18 months, so to speak, in terms of how to react and sense and respond. So the size of the data that you're bringing in, it really has to be relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve. And smaller data sets often can give you a better what is going on right now, as opposed to what's going on over a broader sense of time in general terms.
Okay, great. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, I say, since there was a lot of talk about data size, I'll pivot slightly into data quality. As you can imagine, NASA's been doing AI and machine learning, across the board for many years, and we've come a long way in several arenas, right? Like I've seen very recently we have digital transformation efforts underway at NASA, and AI and machine learning is one of the strategic areas that we're investing in. And so there's heavy research in, hurricane strength and being able to predict hurricanes as global warming has been, increasing both the frequency and the, size of some of these storms. There's been a lot of investment in wildfire outbreaks and predicting wildfire outbreaks using AI and machine learning. trying to get real-time streaming data from satellites in space. One interesting thing I always like to bring up, a lot of people sort of forget what the first A in NASA is, which is aeronautics. And so actually in our aeronautics mission directorate, there's a lot of effort in AI machine learning right now around the program is called the Advanced Air Mobility Campaign. And what they're trying to do is being able to have an automated system to help navigate drone traffic in and around urban areas, right? We're looking forward to a day at some point in the future when I can pull up my app and order Starbucks and a drone flies it to my house and drops it on the front door versus me having to go and get it. And as you can imagine, unlike what the FAA does with commercial airline traffic today, like no human is going to be able to joystick a bunch of drones, from running into each other in an urban air space. And so heavy investment in AI and machine learning there. But it boils down to the data quality, right? Getting the data available in the platforms to run your analytics and algorithms on it.
Just another really quick point on that too. One of the things that we're seeing at Infor is working with our customers that are looking for, digital threads and digital twins. And, again, that speaks to the quality of the data that you're going to require, but it also looks, when you start saying data quality and data discoverability is having what is your metadata strategy to even, to really be able to understand and discern this. So having your platform your platform needs to have the ability to actually, ingest metadata, transform metadata, discover metadata across siloed applications. And that is one of the strengths of the cloud and of those kinds of solutions.
Yeah, so as you all are working through these projects like Flying J on Dan's side, and then some of the drones, which I'm looking forward to the Starbucks delivery on Joe's side, can you discuss how vendor lock-in affects cloud modernization and efficiency? And then how can federal agencies and vendors work together to develop flexible relationships that allow for greater cloud efficiencies? Joe, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So vendor lock-in to me is always an interesting topic, right? Like the federal government is not supposed to show preference to one vendor over the other. On the other side, I would argue you're always locked into something, right? Especially in the technology business. Like we've been using Microsoft Windows PCs for 20 years and no one complains about getting locked in every morning when they boot up their computer and log into Outlook to check your email. So I would say, the right tool for the right job, and trying to be equitable amongst vendors, right? So like back to the AI and machine learning aspects, right? We're making a point internally to benchmark, at least the three major cloud vendors that NASA uses, benchmark each of the AI and machine learning tools so we better understand the capabilities and weaknesses, and working with each of those vendors on, hey, like this is the kind of output that we've got, like is working for us, is it not working for us, this kind of stuff. But on the same time, I think that some agencies, can get themselves caught in knots. If we're talking about like NASA's data, NASA science data in particular, where you're talking about hundreds of petabytes, we as an agency can't afford to have, multiple copies of science data residing in each of the cloud vendors' environments. Because we're trying to show equity or some kind of thing like that, right? It wouldn't be economical for us. It wouldn't be economical for the taxpayer dollars. So I do think that there's a certain amount of trade space and analysis that we have to do while sort of acknowledging that, there is some amount of lock-in that you're not going to be able to avoid, but we're going to try to be equitable about it.
Joe, what are your thoughts from an industry side?
So from an industry side, I completely agree with Joe, because you have to look at the cloud vendors that are out there and, the size of the problem that you're trying to solve. Because, whether it's Oracle, SAP, Infor, Microsoft, Google, we do play in some very specific areas with some very specific capabilities. Speaking for, very, very plainly, most of my career, I've been a chief technology officer for a variety of companies, including Parker Hannifin, JetBlue, and others. And so, from a vendor lock-in perspective, number one, if you are in the cloud, if you've moved from on-prem into the cloud, just by moving to the cloud, you've lessened the lock-in that you have to a specific vendor, because it's a lot easier to move from cloud to cloud as opposed to on-prem to any cloud for that matter. So that's one aspect of that I would say is you actually give yourself more options by moving into the cloud, and then you can actually even federate your cloud, to different providers as well. Now, one of the advantages of a vendor, and speaking from an Infor perspective, is having a platform-centric approach, an industry-centric approach, where you can take advantage of all of the mind share of that industry, whether it's aerospace and defense, food and beverage distribution, what have you. So, and that platform approach really has to lessen the work that's required, improve the value for an organization in terms of integration, ease of use. Do I get analytics and artificial intelligence all combined into a single platform? So when you're looking at vendors, you have to again, look at the value, start from a value proposition, and then say, okay, well, what does this mean to my organization and what are my pain points? So, but just the fact of being on the cloud, I think actually lessens your lock-in.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And both of you mentioned having the right vendors for the right projects. I'm interested to learn more that, how do you balance your organization's differing cloud needs when you're not ready for all data and applications to be in the cloud, but you want to move them all to the cloud at some point. So how are you balancing those differing data and security standards with this type of hybrid cloud approach? Dan, would you like to start?
Sure. So, Infor is a vendor. So speaking from a vendor perspective, so if it's, when we work with those organizations that, provide, goods, services, products to the Department of Defense, right? So they're government contractors. They need to be CMMC compliant. Well, we've got a cloud environment specifically for that, where, they almost get, it's basically CMMC compliance out of the box. So, and again, it's industry specific. So, food and beverage, hospitality, distribution, discrete manufacturing. So it's based on the profile of the organization, profile of our customer, the customers that they serve, and then the challenges that they may have, whether it's industry specific, government, regulatory, or compliance. And so from a cloud provider and looking at a cloud provider, saying, okay, what is it that I'm, again, it's the value proposition and what the organization's objectives are. So, and again, I'm speaking at it from a vendor perspective. So I know I sound a little bit salesy right now, but it really is. It's like, what's the value? What's the problem? And then what's the best fit, right? Because we all do have strengths in different areas. So.
Great. Joe, how do you balance the differing data and security standards under this approach?
Sure. Yeah. Just like Dan said, I think that there's a whole combination of things that come into effect. And as you may have noticed, a lot of my answers have been very science focused because from NASA's perspective, we do a lot of public facing digital services around, science and, for the betterment of all of humanity. And so for us, that's both our primary mission and, the biggest bang for our buck, so to speak, right? I'm not sitting here talking about moving the HR system or the finance system to the cloud. It's not to say that we haven't considered it, but it's not necessarily the highest priority for us right now. And so I think that there's a lot of different criteria that goes into the triage in terms of the public impact that you're going to get out of it, what's the cost, and really is it part of your modernization roadmap? And so that's the one other thing that I find at least very reassuring from NASA. I have not always been at NASA. I was in DoD for 15 years prior to coming here. And the pace at which DoD operates is very different than NASA. NASA tends to be very patient, I'll say, in terms of outcomes. And so a lot of the projects that we're doing tend to be new stuff, not necessarily migrating old stuff, right? I actually joke all the time, the Hubble Space Telescope has been up in space for 30 plus years. We've actually had conversations about like, hey, what would it take to migrate the Hubble ground system into the cloud? But on the flip side, well, the Hubble data we're already making public, in the cloud today. Do we really need to move like the entire science processing pipeline, or can just the actual output and raw data be the most economical aspect of it, right? And so it's I think that kind of triage that we're doing, trying to take a more cloud native approach. I had mentioned the sort of sprawling IT infrastructure, including the ground stations. One of the examples that I usually bring up is a project called Daphne, which is actually there's some physical hardware components that are getting shipped to the ground stations, but the rest of it is all cloud-based data processing. So we're basically going to ride some of the commercial cloud vendor networks back to the United States and do that science processing. And the first mission that we'll be using Daphne is a mission called NISAR, the NASA and ISRO synthetic aperture radar. So an Earth science mission that launches in 2022.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to see how that goes. So as you're transitioning, I kind of want to touch on security. So how can automating security processes like ATO, for example, accelerate cloud modernization? Are there any challenges or potential pitfalls associated with automating security? And what are some of the long-term benefits? Joe, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting. The topic of cloud security is always interesting to me. Back to the coming from DoD, which is obviously very security focused. Where my previous agency, I was at NGA prior to coming here. When we took up adopting cloud back in, I guess, 2016, one of the first things they did was appointed a head of cloud security who laid out a plan and an architecture and was all about, standardizing. And I'll give him a lot of credit. His name was Jason Hess. He talked about ATO in a day, which at the time you would never hear a security person talk about, oh, we could get ATO in a day, sure. So I think it was that approach that sort of got ground into my head there. And now we're trying to sort of further implement it in sort of our platform approach at NASA. I think it's not to say that we don't have our challenges with security still, and overcoming some, what I'll call traditional cybersecurity thinking. But I think the platform modernization approach, doing things, infrastructure as code in an automated deployment kind of way, I think has really accelerated our ability to do a lot of things. And as mentioned, like if we're talking about science data that we're going to make available to the public anyway, you're talking about FISMA low from a security categorization perspective. The risk of trying to migrate and accelerate things is substantially different than if you're talking about moving like the HR or finance system like that, right? So I think getting the right platform construct in place and focusing on that bang for your buck, I think can help alleviate some of those security concerns as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Dan, what are your thoughts about automating security? Moving to the cloud, and I'm going to go back to my 20 plus years as a chief technology officer in a variety of companies, because, whether it was, Parker Hannifin, JetBlue, or Affinion International companies that I was with, we spent a lot of time on security. So when you've got your data on-prem, then your security is on-prem too. And so to a large extent, you're going it alone as an organization. It becomes a very, from a corporate perspective, it becomes a very expensive proposition to do. And at the end of the day, our Infor cloud suites, they run on AWS. So when you think about the security that you get in AWS, the security that you get with Infor, and the cost savings that come into play with that, well, that makes any move to the cloud that much easier, quite frankly, and that much more secure, because it would be really hard for any organization to be able to afford to be able to afford the kind of security that you get through a partnership of AWS and Infor and other, and other cloud providers too. I mean,
you're getting an awful lot of smart people monitoring and watching that security. So you're able to actually, again, you're getting mind share by moving into the cloud, and that makes it a lot easier, makes it a lot faster, and then you get some expertise. So, at Infor, cloud security, CMMC compliance, FedRAMP, FISMA, NIST, all those acronyms are things that we operate in on a day-to-day basis. And so when you're moving to the cloud, when you're in the cloud, those audits, especially the audits, become, significantly easier. Your costs come down and your security goes up. So from a value proposition, it's there. So those are definitely the long-term benefits. And like I said, especially as like a mid-size or even large organizations, being able to afford that kind of level of security is tough, especially in some specific industries.
Yeah, and to piggyback back off of what Dan was saying and to mash it with our previous topic of vendor lock-in, specifically on the cybersecurity side of the house, this is where I've argued to be as cloud native and vendor specific as possible, right? All of the cloud providers have their own set of tools in their tool suite that address some of the security concerns, right? They're just as familiar with the NIST frameworks and the FedRAMP requirements as we are. And so rather than having a thou must use X preferred tool approach, we've tried to say, no, we want to be as cloud native as possible. We want to use the cloud tools for each of the vendors, and we'll figure out how to sort of retrofit each of those environments into the overall enterprise, right? Rather than say, thou must use BigFix, thou must use Splunk, thou must use whatever the enterprise tool of choice is, right? I mean, I think we've all learned from the SolarWinds hacking that happened that getting too caught up on using a specific tool actually increases your risk, not decreases it. So I've been trying to make the argument of trying to take as cloud native approach to security as possible to sort of mitigate some of that risk. And I think it's proving to be very effective.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it looks like we're running a little low on time, but I wanted to get one more question in. So Joe, we can start with you, and then Dan, I'll turn it over to you. So what are some of your organization's top priorities for cloud modernization in 2022? And what are some of the biggest hurdles you're hoping to overcome?
Sure, lightning round, right? Biggest priorities, I mean, I mentioned before the Daphne service. We've deployed Daphne to 2 or 3 ground stations worldwide already. We're rounding out the last couple that we're going to do as part of the initial batch before the NISAR launch readiness review, which is scheduled for next summer. So I would say getting that online, we've already, like I said, it's been deployed to 3 or 4 OCONUS ground stations already, and we've successfully tested and, beamed telemetry data back, which was pretty exciting. I would say that's part of it. There's a lot of push on the science side of the house around some of NASA's open science initiatives. And so there's an open science consortium that's called pangeo.io, that NASA participates in along with some other federal agencies that operate in the earth science realm. And so we've really been focused on getting that science platform in place to really enable the analysis components once all the data has been moved. So I would say those are probably the top 2 for the next fiscal year.
Awesome. I'll have to keep an eye out for that. Dan, what are your thoughts? What are you looking forward to in 2022?
From a vendor perspective, the things that we continue to work on security every day, and we're best in class in that, and we continue to move that needle. In other regards, AI, ML, the ability to be industry specific, even with those types of solutions, is definitely a focus of ours. Then to add to that, there's a lot of edge products when you move to the cloud and you're moving to a platform. So in the case of Infor, it's ERP, but there's also what they call edge products. So it might be Industry 4.0. So we've got a manufacturing plant a smart factory that we're bringing up in Wichita in 2022. So we're really, really excited about that, because that's where we're going to be able to demonstrate a lot of the cutting edge and leading edge type of solutions, for global manufacturers, small manufacturers, mid-size. So we're very excited about bringing Industry 4.0 forward, digital threads, which really means being able to tie siloed applications together and bring people, process, and product, all within the same sphere of information. So those are the things that we're looking forward to, as well as continuing to invest in and expand our cloud suites that are industry specific.
Great. Well, we are all out of time, but thank you both for your perspectives and for your incredible work and innovation in this space. I look forward to seeing what comes next.